This time, it's again a topic deeply related to Japan, but China's resumption of imports of Japanese seafood has garnered significant attention. The story here is that the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, started claiming that Japan is polluting the ocean with contaminated water, and as a supposed sanction in response, they began a total ban on Japanese seafood imports. The CCP has persistently repeated the narrative that Japan is polluting the ocean on a daily basis. As a result, many Chinese people have come to believe that Japan is causing a terrible marine pollution disaster. Not only that, but China has also been trying to increase the number of foreigners who sympathize with their claims. If you look at Twitter, you can see that they've been spreading information in English every day, claiming that Japan is polluting the oceans. However, at the same time, China is still fishing in the supposedly contaminated waters. This means that China itself knows that the ocean isn't actually dangerous or polluted. In other words, this is nothing but anti-Japanese propaganda. Why are they doing this? As I've explained before, attacking Japan is tied to the legitimacy and the reason for the existence of the Communist Party's rule. How, you ask? Well, the CCP portrays Japan, and sometimes the US, as a militaristic country or as a polluter of the oceans. They then claim that it's the CCP that is protecting the Chinese people from Japan, justifying their governance. So, for the Chinese people, the party must protect them from Japan's supposed imperialism or pollution. The same applies to the US. The CCP says that the US is imperialist, aiming for global dominance, and that it's the party that protects the Chinese from American control. By portraying these foreign countries as threats, the CCP legitimizes its rule by saying, if we weren't here, you would be ruled by foreign powers. That's why Japan must always be the villain in their narrative. However, as information about Japan spreads to China, including through the internet and interactions with the many Chinese people now living in Japan, it's becoming harder for them to sustain that narrative. Japan isn't militaristic, in fact, it's quite the opposite. Japan's sense of national defense is dangerously weak. We have a situation where Chinese ships are around the Senkaku Islands almost daily, and Japan's Coast Guard is busy protecting Japanese vessels. The real problem for Japan is a lack of awareness about the threat from China, not any kind of militarism. And as more Chinese learn the reality, the narrative that Japan is militaristic is becoming less effective. Meanwhile, China openly states that it will use military force to take Taiwan, making China the real threat. Faced with this, the CCP had to come up with another narrative to portray Japan as dangerous, which is where the story of contaminated water from Japan's nuclear reactors comes in. They started a massive propaganda campaign, claiming Japan is polluting the ocean, and used it to criticize Japan internationally. But the international community hasn't followed China's lead. After all, if Japan's treated water was dangerous, what about China's own nuclear plants? Or France's? International standards deem Japan's water release to be perfectly safe. If it were truly dangerous, countries like the US or Canada, who are directly affected, would be raising concerns, but they haven't. In fact, the main country making noise about it is China, which isn't even affected by the ocean currents. This is clearly political propaganda, and China knows the ocean isn't dangerous because they're fishing in it themselves. There are two main points here. First, the international community isn't buying into China's narrative. Second, while Japan's seafood businesses are struggling due to the import ban, trade is a two-way street, and there are people in China who are also impacted. But since the CCP controls everything, they don't care if ordinary Chinese people suffer as long as their message gets across. They assume that Japan's businesses will pressure their government, saying, "We're in trouble, so please just do what China wants." This is the same strategy China uses against the US with trade pressure. However, in this case, Japan didn't back down. The Japanese government didn't apologize or stop the water release. This was the right decision. You can't give in to China's demands. As for Japanese businesses, I feel bad for them. They were suddenly cut off from their trade and have undoubtedly struggled. But they didn't pressure the government to give in to China's demands, perhaps realizing that doing so would lead to even worse consequences in the future. Dealing with China means accepting that things like this can happen at any time. In the end, the CCP's attempt to pressure Japan into stopping the water release failed. The international community didn't follow China's lead, and now, even Chinese businesses are suffering. And the world sees China's actions as unreasonable. Fishing in waters they claim are dangerous is causing them to lose credibility. So, in the end, China's strategy has backfired. By attacking Japan unfairly, they've shot themselves in the foot. People are starting to see China as a country that uses dishonest propaganda. To the rest of the world, Japan seems like a victim of the CCP's unpredictable tactics. In that sense, China's standing is deteriorating. Now, as a result, we're seeing talk of resuming seafood imports from Japan. But is this something for Japan to celebrate? Not really, this just means that things are returning to how they were. Japan gains nothing from this, and instead should be asking, what was all of this for? On top of that, Russia is currently imposing similar sanctions on Japan, and like China, Russia is still fishing in Japanese waters. Russia's actions started after a meeting between Putin and Xi Jinping, which shows that China is encouraging other countries to join in on its Japan bashing. Japan's situation is still negative, even if China resumes imports. In addition, the IAEA has said they will expand the scope of inspections of Japan's water release, and China may be involved in these inspections. I think this is something Japan should be wary of. There's always the possibility that China might turn around and claim, "See? We told you it was dangerous," after being part of the inspections. Given how the CCP has handled this so far, it's not safe to assume they'll back down easily. There are two potential outcomes here: either the CCP's Japan bashing fades away as it becomes more of a liability for them, or, in the worst-case scenario, they claim to have found evidence that Japan's water is indeed dangerous. The CCP is notorious for making false claims, so Japan should remain vigilant. Even though the resumption of seafood trade is good news for the businesses affected, it's important to remember that this is just a return to the status quo, not a victory. In conclusion, the CCP is only concerned with its own interests, and they're now trying to quietly resolve a situation that has begun to backfire on them. But Japan should be cautious and not celebrate too early. That's my take on the situation. We'll see what happens next. Until next time, take care.